everyone. I'm Megan Griffin, Senior Program Officer at ACRL. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar offered as part of ACRL's Together Wherever virtual event. Our goal for these webinars is to bring our colleagues together to discuss ways to best meet the needs of the library community during this uncertain time and beyond. And we really appreciate you being with us today. If you'd like, feel free to pop a brief introduction of yourself and say hello in the chat box today while I go over a few reminders. I will also be here to monitor the chat and moderate the questions at the end of the session for our wonderful presenters. As previously mentioned, today's session is being recorded. We'll post a link to the recording on the ACRL Together Wherever website, and it will also be available on the ACRL YouTube channel. The ALA statement of appropriate conduct applies to all ACRL events, including virtual events, and we encourage respectful discourse on Twitter using hashtag ACRL Together 2020. Today's presentation will be 1 hour in length, and we'll leave the Zoom room open for an additional 20 minutes after the presentation for optional networking and additional questions. When you choose to depart today's session, you'll see a brief evaluation, and we greatly appreciate your thoughts and feedback. Thank you in advance. Today's webcast is Flip the Deficit Script. First-year student interviews about everyday life research can change your instruction. I'd like to thank our presenters, Mark Linker, Liz Kosovar-Weidinger, Tatiana Pashkova-Balkenhol, and Emily Cox for being with us today. Presenters, feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Lauren, for facilitating this session. And we would also like to thank the ACRL organizers for inviting us to be a part of the ACRL virtual event. It's a joy for us to be here with you and share our study findings with you. We hope that the students' insight into their everyday life research might ignite some ideas for you, which you could later implement in your instructional sessions. So now, you might be wondering why and how 4 of us from all different institutions happened to conduct this study, right? Well, a few years ago, we were fortunate to work at the same institution, and we shared similar research interests. When we left that institution, we wanted to continue our collaborative relationships, and so we conducted this study that we're eager to share with you today. Would like to thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us. So let's get the show on the road, right? So what's our agenda for today? Let's imagine we're going to the ice cream store today. And first, we'll get the scoop of our study. Then we will see how our study findings can be applied to information literacy instruction session. It's all about dessert today. Then we will highlight different flavors of the student knowledge and talk about our favorite interview stories with you. And finally, we'll share interview questions so you can sprinkle them all in your classroom settings to tap into your students' prior knowledge and research strengths. There will be several opportunities for us to interact during the session, and that's the cherries on the top. And I would like us right now to turn off the camera so we can focus on the content, on the slides. And then I would like us to really think about the most important question of all that we need to address right now, which is, if we were in Chicago for the 2020 ALA Annual, and you were at Ghirardelli's Ice Cream and Chocolate Shop on the Magnificent Mile, what flavor of ice cream would you order? So please submit your flavors in the chat box. All right, I see chocolate, fudge, pistachio, strawberry, vanilla. Woo, lots of choices. Thank you. That's the most important question. Excellent. I think the chocolate is the winning flavor of all. Very good. Excellent. So, like you have your favorite flavors, we also have our favorite interview stories, which we will share with you later on. Also, we will continue asking you questions in the chat. And if you have questions during our presentations, please feel free to submit them in the chat as we go. Now, I am going to turn over to Mark so we can get the scoop of our study.
Hi, everyone. This is Mark. Thank you so much for being with us, and take care of yourselves out there in this strange time. Glad we could spend some time together this way, though. So, in terms of the big picture, when the four of us began this research project in 2016, we each worked extensively with first-year undergrads. With these students, we provide instruction and research support. That was kind of the focus of our job. And two aspects of this work drove our research questions for this project. First, when we talked about working with first-year students with our contacts and collaborators, we picked up on a recurring underlying message. That is, first-year students don't know anything about research, they're information illiterate, and that they need to be taught everything. We felt that this had to be a misperception, as first-year students bring educational experience and life experience from their participation in a culture that is built on information. So we reviewed the library literature over the preceding 10 years to see how our library colleagues characterized the information literacy of first-year undergrads. And we found that overall, the literature paints a pretty bleak picture of first-year students' information literacy. There are exceptions, though, like this passage from Salisbury and Karasmanis's 2011 paper. It's real short, but I'll read it to you right now. While it is not surprising, nor should it be expected, that commencing students are ready and equipped for discovering and using scholarly information, it should also not be assumed that this lack of awareness and readiness means that students are information illiterate. Existing skills represent a milestone along the information literacy learning continuum and provide a starting point for building and refining existing skills to suit the university environment. And it was in this spirit of viewing our students as learning along a continuum that we wanted to learn more about the research experience of first-year undergrads. And we wanted to invite them to tell us about those experiences in their own terms. In our review of the literature, we found that researchers commonly assess students for the research skills used by professional grade scholars. And then when the students didn't do so well on those assessments, the researchers concluded that the students were not information literate. We wanted to try something different. Our approach was to ask students to use their terms to describe a time that they used information to learn something new. Our goal was to use what students told us to find existing experiences and concepts that we could use as starting points for our instruction. And to do this, we each conducted roughly 10 semi-structured interviews with first-year students at our institutions. And those included a community college, mid-sized master's granting university, and 2 large research universities. So we could go into all the details about how we conducted our interviews and coded the resulting transcripts, but in case you couldn't tell from our slides, we are sort of a dessert first kind of crew. So we'll just jump into our findings. But if you would like the nitty gritty on how we did our review of the literature and our interview study, please reach out to us later or check out our articles in the Journal of Information Literacy and Reference Services Review. So instead of getting into the technical details of our methods, we're going to show you how our research findings worked out right away. And along the way, we're going to suggest points of connection with the ACRL framework and suggest possible classroom applications. After that, we'll share just a few important details about how we interviewed the students, but that part's really important. Make sure you stick around. because our interview prompts can serve as a basis for having conversations with students in your classrooms about their research experiences. Next slide, please, Emily. One last thing, though, before we go into our findings, I want to clarify something. So as we share the major themes of our interview study, you'll note that each theme is matched with a frame from the ACRL framework. We don't want you to make too strong a connection between what students told us and the ACRL framework. The connections between the themes and our students' experiences are really just suggestions on our part for starting points or points of leverage for teaching information literacy for students as they transition to a higher education context. We don't want to give the impression that our students showed up at college already having mastered the threshold concepts in the framework and then just told us all about it in the interviews. That's not what happened. But on the other hand, our research suggests that they are not just blank slates and that their background includes some advantageous starting points for instruction. Okay, so having made that clear, let's dig into our findings. And I'll hand it over to Liz to start us off with one of the questions that we asked our students.
Terrific, thanks, Mark. And once again, thank you everyone for being here with us today. It certainly is a pleasure. And my favorite flavor of ice cream in the summertime is black raspberry, and in the wintertime it's chocolate marshmallow, just so we all know that. So our first cherry on top question. We'd like to ask you the questions that we asked our students so you can have their interview experience and contemplate how our questions and our instrument could be applied in your classroom. So our first question to you that we asked our students is list 1 to 3 things, events, or situations that you've recently searched for information for, sought an explanation for, or were curious about. And we're just going to read through those and summarize a little bit. So like our students, your questions are flying in and you have some contemporary issues. I've seen some COVID questions. Someone needs to sell a house, a lot of COVID, water damage, nutrition, setting up an Amazon Fire Stick. I need to do that soon too. Online teaching, right? I'm so happy to see that no one said, will our colleges open in the fall or not? I'm so tired of that debate. Bread knife, defunding the police, excellent. How do I homeschool? Michael Jordan's life, mold abatement, yikes. So, like you, we asked students for 5 things that they had recently researched in the past 6 months in their everyday lives. And just like you, and thank you everyone for all of your answers, they readily and easily came up with 5 things that they were really interested in. It was amazing. So do you ever remember when faculty say, oh, students can't come up with research topics for their papers and they get too many abortion and gun control and marijuana papers? Remember that at all? Let's continue. Our students had practical questions like driving directions, college-related questions like financial aid. They had philosophical, contemporary event, and random research questions covering all subject areas. Our students were curious. We found that the point of connection from our findings, which was that students readily discussed their research questions, to connect to the ACRL framework concept, research is inquiry. So my favorite student question was that a first-year student was debating with her brother the relationship with the speed of light to time. So thank God this was not a reference question at the desk. It would have been challenging, but they were having a vigorous debate about this and using all different types of sources to try to prove their different arguments. It was a pretty neat story. So once again, if we attach this to research as inquiry, for me, my instruction takeaway was based on Lev Vygotsky's social constructivist principle that new knowledge builds on prior knowledge. And in my gen ed history classes that I work with as the history liaison at VMI, I have students do an initial brainstorming session called based on the History Channel. I offer 2 scenarios to my students as we're trying to brainstorm and generate ideas, topic ideas, what they're interested in history, etc. And I say, if you hate history and you were forced to watch 1 hour of the History Channel, what would it be? You're happy to reply. If you hate history, what would you watch if you had to watch 1 hour of the History Channel? Or if you love history and you could only watch 1 hour of the History Channel, what would you watch? And wow, students not offered one, but more than one answer to the question. They couldn't choose, they had 2 or 3 options. So remember the question when faculty often say that students can't come up with research ideas? These students, prompted based on their prior everyday life research experiences or History Channel experiences, had a lot of ideas. The faculty member was so impressed with this activity that he said he planned to use it in the future. Sometimes I don't believe that, but he followed up with email with me, and we had a couple of conversations about it. So it's a really positive experience that drew on our students' strengths and what they knew or were interested in history. So we went from our finding that students readily discuss everyday research topics to the frame, ACRL frame, research's inquiry, to the History Channel exercise. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Emily to discuss the next question we asked and our next set of findings. So Emily, take it away.
All right, so you've already told us at least one thing that you needed an answer for or were just curious about over the past few weeks and months. So now we'd like to ask you if you consulted people to answer your question or to satisfy your curiosity. So if you would like to use, again, the chat box to share if you did chat with people, we would really appreciate it. And as they're coming in, I'll read a few out just to keep things interesting. So it looks like some people are saying no, they just Googled. Wikipedia, someone talked to their family, parents, an expert on diversity. It looks like mother, just trying to catch the ones that look like people were involved. Yeah, so trying to find the expert, talking to your husband on how to fix something. Yeah, so these are all great responses. Thank you so much. And just like you, our students frequently consulted with people that they know. So that was our second major research finding with our study. And it was just one of those things that students kept telling us was how often they would consult with people, their family, their friends, in order to solve a problem or just find another perspective on an issue that they were concerned about, which certainly deviates from us thinking that the only thing they know how to do is Google and go to Wikipedia when they get to college. So a quick student story from our interviews that will kind of illustrate this concept really well. So we had a student who needed to find a job. She knew that her friend's dad owned a business and she might be able to get a job there. So she ended up talking to this friend who was able to put her in contact with the friend's dad, and she was able to apply for the job and eventually get the job. So one thing that students recognize is when it's good to go to people for the best answer and not just rely on online sources. And something else we noticed was that if they do go to online sources, they typically turn to their parents or other family members or friends to corroborate that information. And because of that, we thought it connected to the ACRL frame, scholarship as conversation, because students do have some skills at recognizing that they are part of a community and can engage in conversations with varied perspectives. And a quick instruction takeaway for this research finding, and some of you may be doing this already, is to ask students to find an expert or a specialist related to their topic in addition to whatever required sources they need in order to gain another perspective that may not be reflected in the literature. And this is one way to point out that academic conversations don't just happen in library databases, that students can talk to people who may be able to help them with what they're curious about in regards to their research. So with that, Tatiana is going to propose our next audience question.
Right. And you have already kind of mentioned that we used Google and internet, but I would like to ask you, what other types of sources did you consult in addition to consulting people, in addition to consulting Google? Maybe there is something else out there, databases, thank you. Books, newspaper articles, excellent. LibGuides, YouTube, right, multimedia. Excellent. City budget, beautiful, beautiful. And dictionaries. So let's compare our responses with our study findings. So our next study finding is students learn through a range of information channels, evaluating their sources as they go. Like us, they used Google, multimedia, YouTube, print, primary sources, and people. So to illustrate this finding, I would like to share the student's story with you. The student wanted to learn more deeply about baseball, and she started with her friend first, but quickly got confused by her friend's detailed explanations that went on and on and on. Then the student went to YouTube, but got distracted by a number of related videos on the sidebar. Can you blame her? How many of us get distracted by the sidebar YouTube videos? Finally, she found a TV show. After each episode, the student would call her friend and clarify a specific question she had about the baseball example that was highlighted in the show. As you would agree, it is so important to find the perfect combination of sources, right? And as previously stated by Mark, we connected this study finding with the ACRL frame, searching as strategic exploration. And now you would ask, how do I apply our research finding and the ACRL concept in my instructional sessions? Well, as a subject librarian to the School of Social Work, I work with first-year social work students who are asked to select and research a subpopulation of people experiencing poverty in the US. So I guide students in exploring both our library's discovery tool and Google to find out how both tools could contribute to answering students' research questions. While the discovery tool, containing scholarly articles, will answer their questions about issues of concern of their chosen subpopulations, Google refers them to government and professional organizations that discuss innovative interventions and approaches for working with specific groups. Also, equipping students with advanced skills to query government agencies and professional organizations, I believe, will set them up for success after they graduate. Now, I would like to turn it over to Mark to ask you the next question that we ask our students during the study interviews.
Thanks, Tatiana. Okay, time for my question. So think about your quest for information. If you looked at a number of sources, how did you decide which ones were worth taking really seriously? Or if your search just took you to one source and you decided you were good with that, what factors made you feel satisfied with that one source? And this is something that may take a minute to type up, so we'll give you some time. Please do share your thoughts in the chat box. Looking at several sources for corroboration, good. Someone used the CRAP test, all right. Yeah, looking at the origin of the source is a way to look at it. If you know somebody's an expert, they might be worth taking seriously. Prior experiences with that information source, good. Oh yeah, if a source has an extensive bibliography, that's the good stuff in my book. Cool, all right. Thank you very much for your responses there. Like you're all librarians or something, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me talk about this finding that we noticed. Students tend to double check findings with sources that they trust. And when you talk with educators about students' research habits, it's pretty common to hear that students lack critical thinking skills, and that this lack often manifests itself in students doing just a quick Google search and uncritically accepting the top 2 or 3 answers as the best available accounts to address their questions. Our interviews with students, though, suggest that students often use much more thoughtful strategies for evaluating their information options, especially on questions that really matter to them. Some of the students that we interviewed shared sophisticated strategies for corroborating information, kind of like Emily alluded to. If they ran across helpful information online, they would run it by a personal source that they trusted. Or if they heard new information from a personal source, they would head to the internet to find corroboration from a text-based source. And we saw variations of these strategies among students looking for driving directions, health information, immigration regulations, and even questions of religion. And one of the richest examples of this pattern came from a student who was engaged in rigorous Bible study through her church. Her program required her to write reflective essays interpreting important passages from the Bible. And she liked to refer to commentaries by experts to clarify her own thinking. The experts she valued the most were sources that her pastor had referred her to, so the personal source. Or experts that she'd heard present in church, at conferences, or online. And in looking at the people she'd interacted with, she was building a network of authoritative perspectives that were worth taking seriously. But, and this is the cool part, just because someone was part of that trusted network did not mean that she agreed with everything they said. Instead, she explained that her essays were a lot more fun to write when she disagreed with the commentary that she was using. So she was getting some very sophisticated research experience through her Bible study program. It's pretty great to see. And in terms of application, for me, these findings reinforce a teaching technique that I've been using for a while, kind of in light of the frame authority is constructed and contextual. In a one-shot class, after I introduce a sample topic for our discussion, one of the reflection questions or discussion questions that I like to follow up with asks, what sort of expertise or experience on this sort of question makes a source worth taking seriously? And I've found that as long as I don't pose a research question that's too far removed from the student's experience, students come up with some really good answers, often ones that I had not considered myself. And now I'll turn it over to Emily to pose you with our final student question.
All right, so this is the final question for you. We're almost there. We hope that you hang with us and answer this question too. So once you came to the found explanation, filled the knowledge gap, or satisfied your curiosity, how did you apply what you learned? So this might be something like, I researched 50 different flavors of ice cream, and then I went to the grocery store and bought 10 gallons because I thought that was going to last me through the pandemic. All right, so I'll just start reading a few of these off. Actively worked to be an ally, shared what I learned, trial and error, sent the answer to a friend, purchased a book, commented on a Facebook post, designed a passive solar house. That seems really complicated. Ooh, bought a new pair of Birkenstocks. That's how I like to apply my research too, is buying shoes. All right, yeah, so you can keep your answers coming. I'm gonna go ahead and move on with our last research finding, which was that students articulate the difference that learning makes for their lives. So just like you applied what you learned, just like you were sharing right now. Students show signs that they really know how to research a topic that can change or better their life. Just a quick story from our interview. So I interviewed a student who had been diagnosed with tuberculosis, and she talked with her doctor about potential medications she could try and potential side effects. The interesting part is that she was at a Health Careers high school, so she knew about the websites to go to in order to find reliable information on the side effects of the medication. And she was able to take that information back with her doctor and have a discussion. So we were really impressed with the ability of students to be able to articulate the difference that learning had made in their lives, from health issues to choosing a major, to finding a job, to obtaining a green card. And naturally, we think that has a connection to the ACRL frame. Information has value. Since students are already using information as a means to try to better understand their lives. And a potential takeaway you could use in a class would be, at the beginning of a class, ask students what topics related to the course you're teaching in. Say it's a sociology course that they've read about or been curious about recently. And if possible, try to tie the discussions and class activities to some of the topics mentioned. This will be able to provide students with a context to see how their personal interests can become research topics in college. All right, so we just wrapped up our 5 main research findings. Now we're going to transition to the last part of the presentation. And we are each going to talk about our 4 most impressive and compelling student interviews from our study. And like Mark mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're focusing on trying to give you sort of the best from our interviews. So in that spirit, we're going to showcase our interviews with a little bit more depth. And we think by doing that, it'll help us further understand just how much students bring to the table in terms of their prior knowledge. So Liz is going to share her favorite interview highlight now.
Excellent. Thanks, Emily. This is Liz again. And my favorite story, and all of my stories that I had from my students were my favorites. They were just amazing, just like I have multiple favorite flavors of ice cream. But the best story that was most evocative of what we were trying to explore was, I had a non-traditional first-year student, and they were trying to get a green card. And as they sought information, of course they knew people that were attempting to get a green card, and she heard their stories. And she relied heavily on the government's immigration website. And she also sought out authorities. She had a lawyer. So she related to me that she continually checked in all of those different areas: friends, the internet, her lawyer, and she compared them all, and she kept on trying to find consistencies to verify information from one source to the other. And the best part of her story was that she said that she had recently looked at the immigration website from the government and then met with her lawyer, and they were talking about her case, and she said, well, you know, the immigration website says this, so this would happen. And he's like, no, I think that you're wrong. The immigration website doesn't say that. And they ended up checking the government's information or immigration website together. And indeed, the lawyer was not totally up to date on immigration as of the day. And they both learned together. So it was through this high stakes question that would definitely impact the value of her life, that seeking different information sources, whether it was people or print or websites, and constantly corroborating that information was imperative to what was going to happen in her life. It was a great story. So thanks. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our next story, which I believe is Emily.
Right, thanks, Liz. Right, so my favorite student story was a student who was trying to build a skate park in the city that she lived in. So this is an effort that she wanted to do with her friends, and she started contacting her local city government. And the interesting part of her story is that she pretty much exclusively used people to try to learn more about how to get this done. So she learned more about her local city government, got to know her city council members. So it started out where she would just call them and usually, as you know, have to leave a voicemail. And then after leaving a few voicemails, she would show up in their office and start to introduce herself. And finally, after a few weeks of doing this, they got to know each other on a first name basis and really started to have some conversations about possibly putting together a proposal for a skate park. And the quote that's on the screen here really reflects, I think, the biggest learning experience for her, which is that initially she thought she could just kind of go in and tell them what she wanted and it would be built. But it was a reality check because, of course, that's not what happened. So she had to learn to be flexible and maybe say, well, if I want it this way, maybe they have a different perspective and I need to listen to that and learn. So one of the things that she mentioned was that they said it would be difficult to hire people to build the skate park because it would be expensive. And she said, well, maybe I can get, you know, the friends or the local community to come together and have volunteers to possibly lower the cost. So again, it was just a great example of students knowing how to talk to people and how to communicate to get problems solved and to talk about their ideas. So with that, I'm going to send it to Mark and he's going to tell you his favorite story.
Thanks, Emily. Yes, my story. It's a fun one. We conducted our interviews in late 2016 and early 2017. One of my interviewees was paying close attention to the presidential election and was particularly intrigued by the life of Hillary Clinton and her relationship with President Bill Clinton. As she learned more about the Clintons, she found that the name Monica Lewinsky kept coming up. My student was born the same year that the Monica Lewinsky scandal went public, and so she didn't really know any of the details. She just recognized the name. Some garden variety Google searching brought up all sorts of opinion pieces about the scandal and the outrage that it caused. But my student knew that the editorial she was reading did not provide the whole picture. It's more opinion or coming from a particular point of view. So she went to YouTube, where she was able to find footage of interviews with Bill and Hillary Clinton, and apparently even some recordings of phone conversations between Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. At that point, she felt like she had the evidence she needed to say that she understood what happened with the Lewinsky affair, because she heard it directly from those involved. She didn't have formal training as a historical researcher, but she understood the importance of primary documents in shedding light on controversial historical questions. Her persistence and her sophisticated sense of what counts as evidence really impressed me. I don't think I'll ever forget that interview. Great. Now Tatiana will share her story.
Thank you. My example is the interview with the student who discussed his research experience of becoming more adventurous. So he started first with something familiar to him, the app Spotify, that he used to listen to music while commuting to school, and he's a music major. He decided to download several podcasts. One of them was The Art of Adventure. The podcast series broadened his definition of adventure, from traveling to taking risks, meeting new people, seeking social opportunities, and getting out of his comfort zone. What he learned from podcasts, he immediately applied to his personal life. He volunteered to plan a social event for one of the students' organizations. He started going for lunch with different groups of people. And when I asked him about what he gained from this experience, he responded that he gained a lot more of self-assurance, self-confidence, which in turn helped him become more of himself. And he also added that throughout the process, he learned not to be afraid of making mistakes. I chose this quote because it demonstrates an open mindset approach to learning. So to wrap up our interview stories, I would like to share with you some responses that we would frequently receive at the end of our interviews. The students would thank us for being on their side and caring about them. So at this point, we have taken you through all of our interview questions. We have discussed with you how our study findings can be correlated with the ACRL frames, and we discussed the applications of our study findings, our instructional takeaways. Now, Liz will wrap it up for us and talk about how you can fully implement our study instrument in your instructional sessions.
Thanks, Tatiana. All right, so for y'all, now it's time for your instructional wheels on a gravel road, as Lucinda Williams says. For all of these questions we asked that you apply in your classroom, you want to maybe perhaps think about how can you take a strengths-based approach on what prior knowledge your students bring to your classroom. On our slide, you see one of our participants' instrument filled out. We provide you with a Google document link to our instrument, and the questions are available in our article in RSR. You may want to take parts of our instrument and adapt them, expand them, and alter them, and try to use them in your classroom. So for example, with this student, the 5 things that they were interested in was purchasing a car, helping their mother find an apartment, the best conditioner for curly hair, learning calligraphy, and locating yoga classes. For their 5 questions, what we did, which was interesting, and it's somewhat helpful in paring down if you have more than one question, and this is based on Lloyd Bitzer's rhetorical situation, we asked students to tell us of those 5, which question were they most passionate about? So when you're thinking about that 10-page research paper and you want to be interested throughout all 10 pages, what are you passionate about? In addition to that, we also asked them which question had the most urgency. So sometimes finding directions to a baseball game were more urgent, but you might not be passionate about it. And it helped them narrow down which question they wanted to take further. So those were 2 helpful questions. Moving forward, let's go back and let's revisit constructivist learning theory for active learning. There are 4 main principles. Learners construct their own meaning. New learning builds on prior knowledge. That was a big principle for our study. Learning is enhanced by social interaction, and learning develops through authentic tasks. So we ask that you ask your students what they research in everyday life. Where are they generally looking for information? How do they evaluate information? How do they apply it, or how does it impact their lives? By building your information literacy on their prior knowledge, you add value to what they bring to your classroom. So we ask that you connect their prior everyday research experience or research as inquiry. That you ask your students and promote classroom experiences that research is social for students. It's not an ivory tower. Build conversations in social interaction or scholarship as conversation. Relate their everyday research sources that they search to our library databases that are new to them, or research as exploration. Relate their real life information seeking, verification, corroboration, and evaluation of medical, legal, and consumer information, or authority is constructed and contextual to their academic information seeking. Relate the value of their everyday authentic research questions to the success in their academic research efforts, whether it's a grade on their research project, increasing their knowledge in their major, or simply satisfying their curiosity, just like everyday life. And with that, we encourage you, build on your instruction in your students' strengths, value their information, value the knowledge that they bring from their everyday life research. It works, trust us, and it feels great. You'll love it, and so will your students. Now, Thank you so much for being with us, and it's time for questions. And for us, the panelists, if we can turn our video back on.
Hi everyone, this is Megan Griffin with ACRL. We're going to go ahead, as Liz mentioned, moved into the Q&A. If you can please type any questions that you have into the chat box, and we'll try and get to as many as we can in our time allotted today. The first question I see is, can you list the 5 instruction takeaways again?
Sure, so I can go back to those slides if that would be helpful.
Or we might say that this whole presentation will be recorded so everyone will have access to our slides.
There we go. So this one was significant. Students readily discuss everyday research questions. In the literature, you see sometimes that students don't really have a concept of research beyond just typing stuff in Google and getting the answer. I think there's like really nothing to it. But the stories that our students told us, that they're really interested in things and are willing to engage in and describe a real research process.
For the research findings, students frequently consult people they know. This for us was amazing because we're so used to sending our students to print or electronic resources. I believe that we really confirmed for ourselves that for our students, research is a social process. Most of the time they wanted to talk to someone first before they went to their print or electronic sources. So it kind of takes away from that ivory tower idea that, you know, people go with their books or their internet into this tower and write a paper. You know, people want to be social, they want to be with each other, which I think is a great indicator for the workplace, right? And maybe that's why our faculty are introducing more group work, problem solving assignments into their classrooms.
My instructional takeaway that there is never a perfect source. There are multiple of sources that can contribute to your answer. So I try to, particularly focusing while working with the social work students, try to combine different tools and guide them in discovering them how they can all be combined in answering their questions. And
yeah,
we've seen
the finding on this slide reinforced for me that students don't just take the first answer they see, whether that's a personal source or a text-based source.
Right.
Instead, there's frequently some corroboration going on because they realize that their questions can be tricky and there can be more than one perspective on it. And some perspectives will be more helpful than others.
Yes. And we also saw that students really used primary sources, right? Books and multimedia a lot.
Yeah, and then our final finding was that students articulate the difference learning makes in their lives. And this is where we were just really impressed with the complexity that students were able to navigate using information and applying that learning to their lives.
Someone asked, how did we identify our students and were they in our classes?
I worked with a colleague who teaches a first-year seminar class, and I worked with his students. They were, it was a liberal arts focused workshop, but it was open to a range of majors.
And I reached out to our Writing 100 classes and solicited participants. So not all of them were in a class that I taught.
I also solicited first-year seminar students. I went to my colleagues' sessions who taught library instruction sessions to first-year seminars and recruited participants that way.
Yeah, same for me as well. I recruited through first-year seminar courses.
And someone asked, do you think that our findings show students' use of information is evolving, getting more sophisticated versus previous research that says the opposite?
I guess when I think about myself as a first-year undergraduate, I think the students that we talk to show more initiative than I would have in terms of pursuing a question and questioning the initial responses that they got. So yeah, I think the word is out that not everything on the internet is true, right? And they're ready to delve a little more deeply. Yeah, what do the rest of you think?
I think I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked if our students were compensated, and yes, they were. And each of us had different incentives for our institutions. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Mine was, I just will provide an example, was a drawing for an Amazon gift card, about $20 as an example.
I'd like to take the question, do you think that students have a difficult time translating the skills they use in every day to the academic realm? And I think that's the crux of our instructional takeaways, that it's up to us to build those bridges, right? And maybe that's our job security.
Oh, there's some questions about affect.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the questions that we asked students that didn't come up here is, what would you do differently next time you were faced with a question like this? And one of the answers that came up is, I wish I didn't get so stressed out. Or, you know, I wish I'd maybe allowed myself some more time so I could avoid some stress that way. Or in one medical scenario, someone felt the stress of working with her doctor because they were a serious authority. And she was kind of disappointed in herself for not asking all the questions that she thought she should have. So yeah, affect is definitely a part of things. And it showed in our interviews.
Yeah. And some of the students in our article, you will see probably some of our students said, I wish I would have started with people first and then went to research. Some of the students said, I wish I would have started with Google first and then talk to people. So depending on their scenarios, depending on their processes. And also, like, one of my favorite stories that the student, while reflecting back on his process, he said, I wish I wouldn't been afraid of making mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to get stuck. So, yeah. And thank you so much for your complimentary words about our study. That we hope that you will take some ideas and introduce them in your instructional sessions. We published at the end of 2019. I believe, Emily, if you don't mind going to the first two slides, I believe there are dates of our two articles, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your compliments.
There's a
kind
good
words.
question from Diane about whether we receive pushback from the instructors we work with. So while we find this date, let's thinking about that. It's a good question.
Hmm.
2019 for our articles, right?
Yeah, 2019 for articles. Yeah. Did we get pushed back? I don't know. In my instructional sessions, when I try to tap into the students' prior knowledge, what they're already familiar with, I think from my experiences, I usually also observe how the faculty instructors are also following the example, and I try to add more to it. That's what I found. I found much more encouraging that it's kind of like an opening conversation. It's an opening start, trying to bridge what the students already know and what they're going to be learning in the instructional session.
I have worked with faculty who want the demo, and that can be problematic, but I don't know, when I've used this with students, the review is pretty positive, including things like, you actually got them to talk, which
True.
is a good thing, you know, like you start out by saying, tell us about yourself, and people will respond if you ask the question the right way.
I think my History Channel example is a great example of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Have we covered most of our questions? I'm looking through here, they kind of flew by.
I was excited about our interaction throughout the presentation. We got so many answers to our questions. It was very exciting.
Right. And if you ask these types of questions to your students, you'll have the same experience. I like that someone posted, I love the idea of being gentle with yourself, no matter where you are in the research process. Right. We all have value to bring to the table. Someone asked where the articles were published, and we have those two up.
Yeah, we also like the ice cream theme. Kudos to Emily.
Yeah, Emily is right. I wish we were in Chicago going to Girardelli's.
Yeah.
Oh well, here we are in Zoom.
Here we are.
Again.
Yes.
Hi everyone, this is Megan Griffin with ACRL. I want to thank you for all of these great questions. My apologies for my Zoom crashed a minute ago. So thank you to all presenters for all of your wonderful work today in your presentation, for handling the Q&A. This was a really great dynamic presentation. I really invite everyone to please continue to this discussion in ALA Connect. We've set up a Connect space just for the virtual week of programming that we're all participating in. So speakers are invited to post anything they would like to there. Any attendees are welcome to log in and continue the discussion. So please do so. And again, if there's not any other questions, we just want to thank you all so much for being a part of this week.